What would you do if the two people you trusted most were already writing your betrayal behind your back, thinking you were blind, broken, and blissfully unaware? What if every whispered lie, every stolen glance, every secret hotel receipt was already archived, time-stamped, and waiting for the perfect moment to detonate? In today's story, love is weaponized, friendship is poisoned, and karma arrives not as a whisper, but as a public execution. Subscribe to this channel for more heart-shattering, pulse-pounding stories where secrets don't stay buried, and betrayal never goes unpunished. She knew the night the perfume changed. It was subtle, almost respectful in its arrogance, a fragrance that didn't belong to her and yet clung to her husband's collar like a confession too cowardly to speak aloud. And while Daniel laughed across the dinner table pretending nothing had shifted in the atmosphere of their marriage, Olivia felt something ancient and instinctive awaken inside her. Something sharp and watchful, something that whispered not heartbreak but strategy. The first betrayal had not been the affair, she would later realize, but the assumption that she was too naive to see it forming, too soft to confront it, too dependent to survive it. And what made it worse, what made it surgical, was the identity of the woman who wore that perfume. Serena, her best friend since childhood, the girl who once braided her hair before prom and held her hand through her mother's funeral, the same Serena who stood beside her as maid of honor at her wedding, promising loyalty with teary eyes while memorizing the blueprint of the life she would later attempt to steal. Olivia didn't scream when she first confirmed it. She didn't throw plates or demand explanations. Instead, she opened a quiet folder on her laptop labeled Garden, a name Daniel would never think to open because it sounded like one of her harmless hobbies. And inside that folder she began planting seeds. Screenshots, synced phone backups, deleted messages recovered through cloud archives, GPS location histories, hotel invoices emailed to a secret account Daniel had forgotten she once helped him create when his own storage filled up. She remembered passwords because she remembered everything, a detail both Daniel and Serena mistook for sentimentality instead of precision, and over weeks that turned into months she gathered evidence the way a storm gathers pressure, silently, invisibly, until it becomes impossible to ignore. The miracle, if anyone had asked her then, was not that she endured it but that she transformed beneath it. Heartbreak did not hollow her. It refined her, sharpened her, clarified her vision in a way love never had. And as she watched Daniel perform devotion in public, kissing her forehead at charity events, praising her in interviews for supporting his rising political career, she understood that his greatest fear was not losing her affection but losing his image, because Daniel cared about reputation the way other men cared about oxygen, and Serena, ever ambitious, saw proximity to power as romance, confusing admiration with love and conquest with destiny. The twist Daniel never anticipated was that Olivia had already anticipated him. Long before suspicion became certainty, she had quietly updated their prenuptial agreement during a routine financial review, inserting clauses about infidelity that Daniel skimmed and signed, distracted by campaign calls and Serena's increasingly frequent girls' nights, that always ended with Serena claiming she'd slept on the couch downstairs after too much wine, while Olivia lay awake upstairs listening to footsteps she pretended not to hear. But she heard everything. She heard the shift in Daniel's breathing when Serena's name lit up his phone. She heard the tremor in Serena's voice when she over-explained trivial things. She heard her own heart break in disciplined silence. What neither of them heard was the quiet click of her resolve locking into place. She hired a forensic accountant not because she needed money. She had inherited enough from her mother to survive independently, but because she needed the truth quantified, traced, documented beyond denial. And when the accountant discovered campaign funds rerouted into shell expenses that suspiciously aligned with hotel bookings and jewelry purchases, Olivia felt not devastation but confirmation, a chilling validation that this was no impulsive mistake but a calculated, sustained deception, and that realization freed her from any lingering desire to salvage what was already dead. The night she confronted Serena was not dramatic. It was intimate, almost gentle, as they sat in Olivia's kitchen surrounded by photographs of shared memories, and Olivia placed a printed timeline on the table between them, dates highlighted in yellow, screenshots annotated with timestamps, Serena's face draining of color as the weight of exposure settled over her like ice water, and when Serena finally whispered, "It just happened," Olivia almost laughed, not out of cruelty but disbelief, because nothing about it had just happened. It had been curated, scheduled, rehearsed, and Olivia's calm response unsettled Serena more than fury ever could. "I know. I let it." That was the first unexpected reveal, the first fracture in Serena's confidence, because Olivia explained with steady clarity that she had known for nearly 6 months, that she had watched them build their secret thinking it was hidden, that she had allowed it to continue not out of weakness but because she needed the truth to grow large enough to stand on its own in court, in public, in consequence. Serena wept then. Not for Olivia, but for herself, and Olivia recognized that difference with surgical precision. Daniel's confrontation was different. He oscillated between denial and rage, accusing Olivia of paranoia until she connected her laptop to the living room television and played a silent montage of security footage from the investment property they co-owned, footage Daniel had forgotten about because he had insisted on cameras for liability protection, footage that now displayed him entering with Serena at hours that destroyed every alibi he had constructed, and the room fell silent except for the faint hum of the television, Daniel's face contorting not with guilt but with fear, because reputation, his precious reputation, was collapsing in real time. "You won't do this," he said finally, as if it were a command rather than a plea, and Olivia tilted her head with a softness that felt almost merciful as she replied, "I already did." What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that earlier that week Olivia had met with a journalist who had once owed her mother a favor, a journalist who had long suspected financial inconsistencies in Daniel's campaign but lacked proof. And Olivia had provided that proof not with bitterness but with clinical clarity, ensuring that when the story broke it would not read like a jealous wife's revenge but like an investigative exposé on corruption and abuse of trust, complete with documentation, digital trails, and corroborating sources. The headline detonated 3 days later. Daniel's name trended for all the wrong reasons. Campaign donors withdrew. Serena's employer placed her on indefinite leave pending investigation into ethical violations. The reputation Daniel guarded so fiercely evaporated faster than he could contain it, and as reporters gathered outside their home, Olivia stood at the window not with triumph but with a strange, aching calm, because revenge had never been her goal, truth had been. And here came the second twist. Amid the chaos, Olivia discovered she was pregnant, a miracle she had long believed impossible after years of failed treatments and quiet grief, and the irony was almost cruel. That new life would bloom at the exact moment her marriage decomposed, but instead of panic she felt clarity, because this child would not be born into deception, this child would inherit a mother who chose dignity over denial. When Daniel learned of the pregnancy, his desperation intensified. He begged for reconciliation, citing family, legacy, optics, anything that might salvage his image, but Olivia saw through it with painful lucidity. She had once loved him with devotion that bordered on worship, but betrayal recalibrated love into something wiser, and she refused to let her child witness a performance masquerading as partnership. The legal proceedings were swift because the evidence was overwhelming. Infidelity clauses activated, financial penalties enforced, custody arrangements negotiated with the leverage of documented misconduct, and the courtroom became the stage where Daniel's carefully curated persona unraveled under oath, deposition transcripts reading like a confession he never intended to write, while Serena, subpoenaed and cornered by her own digital footprints, faced consequences she had once believed she could charm her way out of. Yet the most unexpected reveal was not legal or public, it was emotional. Months after the scandal, when the noise faded and the headlines moved on, Olivia received a letter from Serena, handwritten and unpolished, admitting not only the affair but the envy that had fueled it for years, envy of Olivia's steadiness, her inheritance, her marriage, her perceived perfection, and for a brief, complicated moment Olivia felt something dangerously close to compassion, recognizing that Serena's betrayal had been less about desire and more about deficiency, a hunger to occupy a life she believed would fix what was broken inside her. But compassion did not mean reconciliation. Some bridges, once burned, illuminate the truth more clearly than they ever connected it. As her pregnancy progressed, Olivia rebuilt her world with deliberate intention. She converted Daniel's former office into a nursery painted in soft light, symbolically erasing the space where so many lies had originated, and she began speaking publicly, not about the affair, but about financial literacy, legal awareness, and the importance of safeguarding one's autonomy within marriage, transforming personal devastation into communal empowerment, and the response was overwhelming. Women wrote to her from across the country sharing their own suspicions, their own silent evidence folders, their own fear of confronting truths that could dismantle their lives, and Olivia answered them with honesty that did not glamorize pain but validated strength. The night her son was born, a storm raged outside the hospital windows, thunder splitting the sky in violent applause, and as she held him against her chest she understood the final twist of her story. Betrayal had not destroyed her life, it had exposed the illusion that her life depended on anyone else's loyalty to remain whole. Daniel watched from a distance, visitation supervised and reputation permanently altered, his political aspirations dissolved into cautionary tale status, and Serena relocated to another city, her name now associated with scandal in ways she had once feared but never believed would materialize. And while some might call Olivia's journey revenge, she recognized it as revelation, because the true miracle was not the exposure of deceit but the rediscovery of her own power. Years later, when her son asked why she and his father lived in different homes, Olivia would choose age-appropriate truths over protective lies, teaching him that love requires integrity and that trust, once broken, demands accountability. And she would tell him not with bitterness but with strength that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is walk away with evidence instead of excuses. And somewhere in the quiet spaces of her rebuilt life, Olivia acknowledged the strange gratitude she felt for the night the perfume changed, because without that subtle shift she might have remained asleep inside a marriage that looked perfect but lacked foundation, and the woman she became, resilient, strategic, compassionate yet unyielding, was forged in the fire of betrayal she had already known was coming. And as the world moved on to newer scandals and fresher headlines, Olivia lived not as a victim of infidelity but as the architect of her own justice, proof that sometimes the most devastating words in a marriage are not, "I don't love you," but, "I never thought you'd find out," and that the most powerful response is not a scream but a folder quietly labeled, "Garden," waiting for the day the truth blooms too loudly to ignore.